All right, are we ready to go? I don't hear any more music. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Your Music, Your Money Cue Sheet 101 to Maximize Music Royalties panel at the Production Music Conference. How is everybody? So we have a nice little cross-section of panelists here, starting at the end with Jacob, who is a composer, who starts off the ecosystem of cue sheets, moving to Ginia, Chief Cue Sheet Officer at Disney, who creates cue sheets. I am a music publisher at Sony Music Publishing, so I have dealing with a lot of music cue sheets. And then we have Mark here, who is at Orfium, and his systems are the thread that binds us all. So, Mark, what is a cue sheet?
Yeah, I always say a cue sheet is a paycheck. It's basically how you get paid as a rights owner or a composer. But maybe another way of looking at it is, think about these factories back in the day when you have to work and you have to sort of clock in. You've got that card, that punch card. You clock in the morning and you clock out at night. It's a little bit like that, but music. The music is clocked in and clocked out in a TV show. So the factory worker is the piece of music. If you don't clock in correctly, if you don't clock out correctly, you don't get paid. That's a cue sheet.
Nice. Ginia, can you give us kind of the essential elements that make up a cue sheet?
Yes. So, and this happens sometimes where I'm looking for cue sheets and I have the body of the cue sheet, but there's no header. First of all, there has to be a header. And the header on a cue sheet is telling you what the production is. It's telling you where it airs. What is the duration of the production? What's the duration of the music? It tells you the air date, the release date. So all of that information, all of that metadata is important, and no one is going to get paid if that information is not on a header. It's an identification, episode numbers, ITER numbers. As much information as we have that we can put on the header, we do. Then the body of the cue sheet obviously has to have all of the cue titles, any third-party songs, the duration, time code is preferable, IPI numbers are preferable, but not necessary, unfortunately. We should make it a law. So,
We'll get to that.
It's a lot of work. And those are the basics of a cue sheet. And it's the main thing is that you want to make sure that the entitled parties or the interested parties, in the US they say entitled parties, in London I notice they say interested parties, yes. So you want to make sure that you have all of the composers, publishers, songwriters, the name of the cue. You need to know how the music is used, and that's super important, and I'm sure we'll cover that later. How is the music used? Is it a visual vocal? Is it a main title? Is it a background instrumental cue? All of those things are important. Those are the essentials.
All right, that sounds super simple. Jacob, as a composer, we were talking earlier, and Jacob said his name was misspelled. How does that affect your cue sheets that you're associated with on the music that you compose for film and TV? Is that a challenge?
Oh, yeah, of course. Well, I would say that if you're a creative person, often, I guess more times than not, us creatives are not as detail-oriented, and cue sheets seem like paperwork, and we don't want to deal with it. So you just sort of assume the music editor or somebody else is going to fix this. And that is not the case. And even I've been on several productions where I just say, hey, can I get a copy of the cue sheet at the end? And I look at it and it's riddled with mistakes, like just major errors. I had an editor friend who said he was on an Amazon series and they ended up submitting the cue sheet and it had the temp score in the cue sheet. So it listed John Williams' Home Alone score in some show that released a few years ago, and he was just like, 911 calling everybody. So, yeah, it can get really messy, and you just, as a composer, you just think, oh, obviously everybody understands what's happening. There's no way this could be mistaken or forgotten but you'd be very surprised. There's just a lot of moving parts, and you kind of have to, it's really easy for the composer to come across like overeager and annoying, so you have to be very gentle about asking. And I'm not sure if it's changed, but I remember, 2010, 2011, 2012, when I would be working, especially on independent productions, I would be trying to submit the cue sheet myself, and everybody was like, oh, no, we won't accept it from the composer. Absolutely not. Because they just would assume that I don't know if they think you're going to over-exaggerate how much music you had. It has to come from another source. So you'd have to sort of appeal to a producer or someone else. Please email this. Here it is. Just forward it, and then it would be accepted. So anyway, I don't know if that answered the question.
What was the question?
We spelled your name right on your Disney cue sheets.
So this is for all of you. How do each of you in your roles interact with cue sheets? Like Jacob, are you involved in cue sheet creation at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It really helps, especially on episodic productions. It's actually far easier. And if you have a music editor, it's like a godsend. And the cue sheet actually starts to take shape during the spotting session. As we're spotting, we're working in a Google spreadsheet that's just like a nice template, and we're filling in, and then as we get cue revision requests, those things are updated, and sometimes a needle drop, the license falls through, and they said now the composers need to score the scene. And so by the time we're doing the final mix, we're all online, we can see ourselves logged in, we're updating it, even during the mix. And so by the time the mix is finished and it even airs, you have everything like step by step. There's no mistake. A lot of times as a composer, you might score a picture and say your cue is 87 seconds long. But then you get into the mix and they say, hey, you know what? We're actually not going to start the cue until knee deep into the scene for, just creative reasons. So then your cue now, you're like, oh man, that was an 87-second cue. Now it's 14 seconds long. But that's what it is. So you have to make sure you mark that. And I think it's really easy as the composer to just look at your Finder window and be like, well, that cue's a minute and a half. But it was actually only 10 seconds in the final. So those sort of details need to be had, because if someone like Ginia were to review, then it makes you look like you're over-exaggerating what you did, and then it calls into question all the details. So.
Nice. Ginia, so where do you come into this process?
After that whole thing happens, and after the final music mix, we ask the production party to come to us. We're going to set them up in SoundMouse. It used to be RapidQ, both great programs. We get the production set up in SoundMouse. We get the either it's a composer, it's usually a music editor, or it's a production person in one of our numerous production segments. And we train everybody. I'm emphasizing that because say you've got a new music editor or somebody that's new in the industry, if you train this person, that person's going to do it right every time for every studio. So we definitely make sure that they're trained. And so we're interacting with all the different production parties, all the different production segments for all of our various series, back and forth until they have it right, or until we have it right, and then we finalize the cue sheet.
Nice. And then, Mark, you're at SoundMouse, which is part of Orfium now. See the nice merch we have here. Where does SoundMouse get involved in the creation of cue sheets through this process?
Yeah, we're like the glue that sticks everything together, basically. So we are a platform. Our clients are studios, broadcasters, streaming platforms, effectively the companies that are responsible for cue sheets and need to deliver those cue sheets to the rights organizations. So our platform enables these companies to connect with the people that actually do the work of filling out cue sheets. And that all happens on our platform. So Disney, for example, will create headers in our platform. Those headers are then made available to the people who are responsible for finishing those cue sheets. That could be a producer, it could be a production assistant, it could be a music editor, it could be a composer, it could be a music supervisor, it could be all sorts of people that are involved in that process. But effectively, each of these people have an account, which we call a workspace, on SoundMouse, where they fill out that data, and when they're done with it, that data goes back to Disney or another client for review. During that review, it may appear that certain details are incorrect, so our client can send it back to that individual or that company for further change. But at the end of the line, we've got a finished cue sheet, an approved cue sheet. Once that cue sheet is approved, there's something interesting happening. We're sending it off to the PRO, and that is then the document that is effectively the paycheck. At that point, the cue sheet turns into paycheck, and every second of every piece of music on that cue sheet receives a monetary value, and that monetary value depends on how that program was used. Was it streamed? Was it on a major network? Was it on local TV? Where was it playing out? That determines what the monetary value is of that second in that cue sheet. So that's the first part that happens to that cue sheet. The second thing that happens to that cue sheet is that that cue sheet can then be made available to other people in the ecosystem. Once a cue sheet is approved, it doesn't necessarily just need to go to the PRO. It could go back to a publisher, or it could go back to a production library, or it could go back to a composer. So at that point, the client has the ability to start delivering data to other places in the ecosystem.
Nice. So Jacob, this is a very complicated process, and it sounds like there's a lot of people who handle the information on the cue sheet. Is there any advice that you could give to composers that you've learned on how to protect your income, because cue sheets equal paycheck, and it comes back to you, how to protect your income by having an accurate cue sheet?
I wish there was a good answer for that. I mean, organization is definitely key. I also, just a general recommendation for composers, I think, I remember first starting in the industry and you learning about cue sheets and you're just like, oh, this is this magical thing where you can make money. Like, I need to get on some damn cue sheets. Like, what, how do I get involved in all this? And then when you do work on something, I remember colleagues, they'd be like, I scored this film and the cue sheet was submitted and I haven't made any money. And then they would just literally badger people at ASCAP or BMI, like, how come it's not paying out? So I think the general thing that I've noticed is that it is an industry. You just need to work in the industry and you need to be involved in many different cue sheets. And the more your name appears in the system will work for you. And I think that changing my mindset from being like, hey, I did this feature film, I did all the music in this, and you're just hoping that this cue sheet will sort of pay out or help you survive. What's more important is that you're involved in many different productions with different studios, helping out other composers. You might write on this cue or just whatever, and you get 2% of this cue or whatever, but your name is on another cue sheet. And then all of a sudden, when my name started popping up on lots of different things, you start seeing in your portal these cue sheets appear. And even, one more thing. The other thing too is, I know a lot of composers, they're really eager to retain all the rights to their music. They want to keep the publishing, they want to keep the masters, so you might do an independent project. And part of your negotiation is, I'm going to own everything. That's a double-edged sword, because if you do own everything, then it's only on you to chase after all of the potential income from that. But if, say, Disney owns the publishing, you can be sure that the money's coming in. They're not going to let money just sit out there. And so I found that the ones that I owned, they haven't paid out very much, and I had to really fight to get the money. Whereas, if maybe a medium-sized production company was involved, those cue sheets racked in money right away.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's also really important to provide identifiers. So your name is essential, but your name can be misspelled, as we found out today. So I would say identifiers are really crucial. IPI-CAE numbers, so interested party identifiers. Every composer has one. Every publisher has one. Within SoundMouse, you can enter it, and our clients are doing that. And the reason why they do it is when that cue sheet arrives with the PRO identifies that composer by their identifier and not necessarily by their name. Now, Maybe domestically it's going to be fine because people will not have that much difficulty matching data. But once that cue sheet starts traveling abroad, all bets are off. At that point, when you have an identifier against your name, that's great. That's really going to make a difference. That's how things are going to be matched abroad.
Yeah, can I just make one point also? So get a copy of the draft or ask to look at the draft. If it's an external production company, just ask, could I see the draft? Somebody in that production chain should actually be able to show you, okay, this is what we're giving to Disney or to Amazon or to Netflix. That helps you because then you can say, you spelled my name wrong. Or you can say, I'm not with this society, I'm with another. Or, by the way, here's my IPI number. So that would be helpful.
Yeah, because cue sheets are actually a legal document in the production ecosystem. So yeah, it's probably good to make sure it's right. So Ginia, it sounds like there could be mistakes made in various aspects of the creation. What are some of the most common mistakes, and how are they dealt with?
Oh, there's
so many.
There's so many. Let me pick a good one.
Like, are there
usage.
Certain potential points of failure of
Definitely.
Okay.
Well, timings are off sometimes. How the music is used is off sometimes. So, your main title and your visual vocal, they're higher paid performances. If they're not marked accordingly, then you're not going to get paid what you need to be paid. So that's something to look for, is the usage. I've received some really bad cue sheets, I will admit, that we try to kick back. I have an excellent team also, so that helps us. Hi,
Shout
team.
out.
And my team will do some QC work on cue sheets. So I know we have a lot of different production segments, but there are certain productions that you're going to want to watch them. Now, if it's an animated...
You watch the actual show.
Watch
you view
the
it.
actual final cut with the cue sheet that's coming in to make sure it's correct. And I've been asked by various people in leadership if that's a waste of time. Okay. It's not a waste of time, in my estimation, because especially a feature film, really, are you going to accept the Marvel cue sheet that just came in and not look at it and make sure it's correct? No, you're never going to do that. There are various people in the production chain, in the production parties, music business affairs, there's licensing people, that have to also look at that cue sheet that you've just vetted and possibly changed so that we can make sure that it's correct. And some of the shows, TV shows as well, like network still pays higher. You're going to want to watch those shows. Absolutely. So your cable shows we watched because they were just so darn good. But we do watch cable shows as well.
Plus the clearance and sync teams want to make sure that the licenses they're issuing, the use is the correct in the show.
That's right.
So let's move on. Mark, you are a recovering lawyer. So what are the legal ramifications of a cue sheet that's inaccurate?
I'll never be able to shake that off,
No,
right?
no, we all know now.
Yeah, it's terrible. There can be considerable ramifications. Like I remember this one example where somebody did a drop needle license and put the wrong track on the CD, on the cue sheet. This was a long time ago when everybody was using CDs. But literally they put in number 2 instead of number 3 of the CD. These mistakes were made. It's sort of incredible. And that cue sheet goes out and that can have all sorts of impacts on your sync license. You've basically cleared the wrong track because somebody just put number 3 on the CD. It's those sort of obvious things that can have significant legal ramifications. There's just significant money associated with that. So that's just one example, but also underperformance and this is perhaps even more true in Europe, broadcasters have an obligation to report the data. And if the data is missing, collecting societies will go after broadcasters when a cue is missing or is incorrect. So I think people do try to do it right and come up with ways to check these cue sheets and do it properly. I think the other thing to keep in mind is there's so far we've really talked about programs that are sort of that generate a lot of income, that a lot of people watch, that have a very long shelf life. And that's the other reason why it's really important to get a cue sheet right. If your program has a long shelf life, that cue sheet is going to generate income for decades, literally decades. And not just for you, for your children and grandchildren as well, because that's how long copyright lasts. So get that cue sheet right. But like so far we've been talking very much about shows that travel the world and that everybody knows, but there's a massive long tail as well of cue sheets. And I would even go as far as saying, like, if you create a report for a podcast, or if you create a report for an Instagram video, why is that not a cue sheet? It's an audio-visual production. It has music associated with it. Why is there no cue sheet? To my view, that's no different. But the shelf life of a video like that, or a promo or a trailer, is much shorter. But there's still somebody that created that, and there's still music that was licensed into that program, and that should still be paid out on. So, if you would want to check those cue sheets, you need to, all of us together would be checking cue sheets all day. So you need to have another way of dealing with the long tail. And that's where audio recognition, for example, comes in, which is a great way to scale this up to massive, massive volumes.
That sounds fun. So before we get into that, I just want to see, so it sounds like there's been described financial ramifications of an inaccurate cue sheet. Is there any way we can quantify the revenue loss for that on a global scale? Yes, you can?
I did that.
You did? Oh, of course you did.
I did. I know. Okay, back to why are you viewing this content? Why are you vetting these cue sheets? You're using a lot of time to do that. Okay, so I thought, okay, how am I going to prove that you're going to make more money if you do that? So in 2018, I think it was, I looked at a bunch of statements, of our statements, and extrapolated this visual vocal made this much, and get something similar. That's an instrumental cue. This, it's going to be paid less. This main title made this much. And put it all together with the help of some finance geniuses, and determined that we make 12% more global income when we vet those cue sheets and catch those errors. That it is important. It's very important.
So
I'll never do that again.
you did it. We now know the answer. So Ginia, Jacob, Mark, this is for all. What role does technology play in your creation of cue sheets? You touched on it a little bit with audio recognition, but does Disney utilize that?
I think the ABC side is using audio recognition in their promos. Disney Channel, not so much. Not yet, I don't think. I think we're investigating that, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
But there are definitely Disney entities that use audio recognition.
Yes, absolutely. So in the cue sheet world itself, it's not as easy to use audio recognition. I don't think it's quite there yet. It will get there, but it's not there yet. But some of the technology that you provide, that SoundMouse provides in some of the uploads that we do, I know part of it's manual, but part of it is also part of your technology. And we ask for a lot of uploads. So, that's helpful. That has been really helpful for us because we're getting an Excel from a production company where they're not providing us cue sheets in a good platform. So we have to upload them and then do the corrections afterwards.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of technological things you do, and it depends on how the cue sheet is created. So if you look at a manual cue sheet, if you need to type in every individual record, that can take a very, very long time. So you need to have things like duplication, functionality, et cetera, as well.
Plus, a lot of times in Q-Sheet world, it's the interns and production assistants
Yeah.
who are doing this.
Yeah, it's like all across the board, one of the things that we came across, for instance, was that a lot of music editors copy data over from Pro Tools, and Pro Tools has frame data. So my colleague Thomas, who's right there, has been sitting with music editors, looking over their shoulder, trying to figure out what they actually do. So we really try to get in the minds of the people that make these cue sheets. And what we found out that that's what they do. So we need to we've added support for time codes in cue sheets. You don't need time codes from a monetary perspective or cue sheet perspective. You don't care about time codes.
We do.
Well, you do now, yeah. But most people don't care about time codes. But music editors, it makes their life so much easier. So, you can do technological changes like that. Or music supervisors often use systems like Travana Tracks, for instance, where they create lists of all the drop needles and some other music as well. That's a sort of prefab cue sheet. If you can load that into SoundMouse, half of the work's already done. Now, and then the other side is the audio recognition. Now, audio recognition doesn't necessarily always work well for all types of programming, like Ginia said. And the reason for that is that typically the music is locked down in the final stage, and there's no actual recording of that music that can be uploaded in our recognition database. And what all of this is based on is recognizing a recording in a program. So if you don't have the original recording, you cannot recognize it. So that's always a limitation. But that's why it's important that you have a sort of hybrid approach. But for production library music in particular, that music is synced into a program. That music is not changed in the final sort of mixing stage. That music is there, that's synced in as if it's a popular track. So getting production library music in our databases so that we can recognize it in content is very important. And if you go into more like game show type programming, or if you have music for news, for sports, those side of shows, game shows, entertainment type shows, there's not a lot of score music in there. And if there is score, it's typically a library that sits somewhere on a drive and that people just pick from. Mm-hmm. So that is pre-existing music. Audio recognition can completely change how those cue sheets are created. There's very little manual interaction.
How does that affect Jacob, who's sitting there creating this beautiful original score? Is there any way for him to get his original music into that system for audio recognition?
Yeah, absolutely. There definitely is. But it's very unlikely that that's going to be used for the original creation of that cue sheet. However, there's a lot of ephemeral content that's going to be created. So you have behind-the-scenes material, you have promos, trailers. Not just here, you have trailers that are being created on the other side of the world where you have no visibility of what that music is. Also, trailers and promos tend to be paid out at a much higher rate abroad than here in the US. So getting your music into a system like SoundMouse means that we can recognize it. We can recognize it when that piece of music pops up on YouTube. And then we create effectively a cue sheet for a YouTube video, and we use recognition for that. Nobody's manually creating cue sheets for YouTube. That'd be crazy. So you do that automatically using recognition. If you have that piece of music in our database, we will recognize it. It will get reported to this foreign society that will pay out on it.
So you have the audio file, the sound file that's recognized, but where does the metadata behind it come into play? Like, Jacob, do you put any metadata into your audio files or your Avid outputs?
Yeah, I do. However, I don't think that it stays, like everything that we do gets mixed into an M&E track, music and effects track for whatever the production is, and it's just one big heaping mess of audio. So I don't think that any metadata stays. And then also, considering that you were mentioning the, maybe AI or, something doing the audio fingerprinting system, even after, like the way that I've always worked is we prepare a piece of music and then we send them the stems. And I know from experience that it's better to deliver more than less because it's easy to hit the mute button. But if they're like, oh, this cue needs a little more, you don't want to just be like, oh shoot, well we're on the mix stage, and you know. So very often the original piece of music is changed dramatically. In fact, on the Wonder Years we were talking about earlier, we had this huge cue with like a huge like woodwind section and brass and all this stuff, and Fred Savage, in the end, we muted everything but the solo acoustic guitar for this huge cue. And we were just like, oh my God, we spent all this time and energy and money recording this, and now it's just literally like we could have done it ourselves. But yeah, and you know, you mentioned the trailer. I wanted to say something specific that happened to me in like 2016 or 15. I did an original piece for a Disney trailer for the Jungle Book movie, and I don't understand how this happened, but that music for that like spread everywhere, and I got emails from people in other countries, and they were like performing the music live from the trailer, and there was like these shows, and people had like choreo. To this day, I was like, can you send me a video? I don't understand this at all. And then I started getting all this payout from like Brazil from this Jungle Book trailer track that I made. I've never understood it. I'll take the money, though.
Cue sheet.
But I was very surprised. Yeah, so that was one cue sheet, because I was like, I'm not expecting to make any royalties off trailer stuff at all. But that one, for whatever reason, just, I still make money to this day from that cue sheet, yeah.
Well, it sounds like the metadata was right. So, Ginia, how do you deal with gathering the right metadata to put behind your cue sheet? Like, what's that process like?
We have so many systems that has all of that data in it. So we use something called radar, we use something called sonar, and we're pulling information from that. But it all starts with the production schedules, and we have so many production schedules from all the various production areas, so we get those weekly. Because we have to, you know, sometimes air dates change, so we have to make sure that we have all the correct information. But we pull the metadata from our systems for ITER. IPI, unless they give us the IPI, we don't have it. So that's a point to make to composers that are out there. Provide your IPI number when you sign up.
Maybe you should put it in
Because
your composer agreement. That would be nice.
It probably is by now. I'm sure it is. But we will add it if we can, and of course our publishing companies, we've already added them because they stay that way in SoundMouse, which is great. It's a lot. It's a lot to collect all the different data pieces. I want to go back to the time code thing for a second, and the reason why it's important for a couple of reasons. The reason you said, but also because this team gets a lot of music identification requests because people license pieces of music, obscure pieces of music, right? So imagine trying to find that in a Lucasfilm movie or a Marvel movie or just any movie, Inside Out 2, which is streaming on Disney Plus now. So, if they give you the time code, we want to use this at this time code, then it's easier for us to find. But we've had to do we've had some crazy music identification projects where we've had to use other means.
Yeah, and just to clarify on the time codes, I was talking about the frame rates that sit at the end of the time codes. So I don't think you care about that, do you? No? Okay, good. You said two interesting things. One is ITER. So ITER is, for those of you who don't know, the Entertainment Identification Registry. So it's an identifier that's a little bit like an ISBN for a book, but it's for an audiovisual production. So a film will have an ITER, TV shows will have ITERs, and you've got different levels all the way down to versions, because you can have the German version, you can have the French version, English version. They may have different run times. Each of those have different ITERs and could, in certain cases, have different cue sheets as well, because the runtime is different. So ITER really helps the industry manage that entire workflow globally. And it's important to sort of be aware of that as a music rights owner or a composer, even though you may not directly interact with it. But ITERs, it's one of those things that is like an ISWC for a piece of music, which is so important for music. And what we try to do within SoundMouse, or what we have done, is effectively create databases for our clients. So our clients can manage their interested parties or entitled parties independently of the cue sheet. So when a user that is filling out a cue sheet for Disney starts typing in Jacob's name, it will automatically appear, and it will automatically appear with an IPICE number. So the
With
user,
the correct spelling.
with
Yeah.
the correct spelling. And the user will just click on that name, and then it will automatically suggest the most likely publisher that is relevant in that context. Plus verification of that as well. So it will show which bits have been verified by the Disney team. So building in functionality like that makes life so much easier for the people that are creating cue sheets, because they don't need to think as much about it. You know, the system sort of does some of the thinking for them, and that really reduces significant amounts of errors.
So,
Can I say something about the
yeah.
time codes? So yeah, I just use Google Spreadsheets, and we have it set up. You put the time code in, and it tells you the duration. You just use the auto, whatever some features, and that's really helpful in explaining, because this has happened. It happens all the time now on shows where you'll have a scene in a bar or a club, and they'll have me and my team will make the source track for the club, but then you're writing a score cue on top, and so you might have, every time you cut back to the bar, you're hearing the source cue, but then the score piece goes over it, which can get really confusing for someone like you who's reviewing. So then we put the time code in, and it sort of explains like source cue, and you see it from here to here, and the source cue might run like 5 minutes straight, but the score key might be like right in the middle. But you're not going
Overlay
away
cues.
from it, you know?
Right. How much time do we have? We're going to do till, okay. Well, then I wanted to just ask one more metadata question before we move on to a little bit more technology. For SoundMouse, I know you've ingested a lot of production music libraries, commercial tracks, et cetera. What's the metadata behind it, and how are you gathering that information?
Yeah, so we've got about 100 million unique tracks in our database, and we receive about 1.5 million tracks per week, just to give you an idea of scale. It's massive. And a lot of tracks that we receive are duplicates. We already have them, but they were supplied to us through a different supplier. The vast majority of this is commercially released music. There's a lot of production library music in there, and there's also score music. So the metadata is coming from different places. I think for score music and production library music, it's fairly straightforward, because there's typically a single or maybe two sources of the data. Like a production library represents the recording rights side of things, represents the publishing side of things, so they can provide us with the let's call it the label name, and the publisher name can provide us with the ISRC and the ISWC, can provide us with IPI numbers. So it's all coming from a single source, and it's a trusted source because it's the actual owner of that data. With the commercially released music, it's a lot more complicated, because you get your recordings from the labels, and they don't have publishing information, and if they do, it's not always reliable. So for the publishing information, you need to rely on other sources. And we typically rely on publishers, we rely on societies. They open up their databases to us, and then we go through a matching exercise. And that matching exercise, of course, highly complex and also very contextual. Like the publisher that owns a track here in the US may be different from a publisher that owns the track in Germany or France. So the context of the use is essential in determining what is the right metadata. I think this is something that we've been excelling in, and especially from sort of coming from the SoundMouse side of the business that was acquired by Orfium. The acquisition by Orfium has really helped us supercharge that matching process using the AI technology that was developed at Orfium that really sort of brings this into sort of the next level. And that's very exciting, because we can see that the quality of the metadata that we get from recognition, making contextual data available, it's just really good.
So you mentioned the AI technology to match the metadata. Is there any other uses for the AI in this whole process?
Yeah, AI, it's a bit of a catch-all for everything, right? Yeah, so it's a lot of it is about machine learning. So you're effectively teaching a machine that something is something, and then when something else happens, it will recognize that it's the same, and therefore it's that. So we use it, for instance, in identifying that something is music in a program. So, we first run our recognition process, which is a fingerprinting technology. We identify all the pieces of music.
So
but
you're running a show
yeah, we
through
run a show.
program. Okay.
Exactly, we run a show through. But there may be little bits that we haven't recognized because the music is not in our database. For instance, score music, it's not in the database on time. So we then run an AI process that says like, okay, there's a piece of music here, or there's a piece of music there. And that AI process has effectively been taught, like, this is what music sounds like. If you hear that, that's music, create a little placeholder. And we call that a cue candidate. So that's another application, but there are loads of applications. And just to make things clear, this is not generative AI. That's not what we're talking about. That's a completely different thing. So generative AI is where, creative products are being created by computers. So that's not what we're doing. We're using it for matching and learning how certain things sound so we can recognize things when they happen again.
Nice. Is it time for questions? Yes. Does anyone have any questions for these cue sheet experts? Yes. First one on this side. Advice to name instrumental tracks.
Things that are more confusing.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Naming your tracks you're talking about? Yeah, that I do have some. We just went through a cue sheet yesterday, one of my team members. I would stay away from generic names like
Main title.
main title. If you're going to use main title, use the name of the show, or you know what I mean, or episode, whatever. Use the name of the show and then say main title. Open title, opening title, things like that. You need to be more specific. What is the show? Because in the olden days, nobody thought about that. But once you register a title that says main title or opening title, on the back end, the money that comes in, how do you know what it connects to? You don't know what it connects to. You can barely pay that out. So, yeah, you need to be descriptive. I prefer scene descriptions. And I know a lot of libraries, sometimes they want to use their library track number. But it is better to use a scene description, in my estimation. It's more helpful when we're identifying music. It's much more helpful. Same with end title. If you're going to use end title, or make sure you put the name of the show. Just be more specific.
I would add to that, yes, to the scene title. I was just thinking from a production music standpoint. I remember that the first broadcast show I had, and actually had a music editor, she would name all the cues like Carter Cries in the Den. And I'm like, this cue, it can't be called that. It's got to be called like Tears of Joy, or like it needs to be something weighty and poetic. And she told me like, oh, you're gonna get screwed in the system. Like, how many pieces of music people titled Tears of Joy. So I think that if you're writing for production music library, like you probably want to avoid titles like Vengeance. Like, how many of us probably thought, oh, this is badass, this is not my music. So you got to give a little more, it's got to stand out in some way. And I don't think spelling stuff differently makes it any better. You don't want to use like numbers and like a 3 instead of an E. I just think you have to, maybe embrace sillier titles or something, because I do think, as I'm sure there's a lot of composers here, we all want to title our stuff that sounds not, number one, like what the track sounds like or feels like, but we want to use the same cool sounding words. So yeah, I think embrace the weird and the odd.
Nice, thank you. There's a question back, yes.
Hi, good evening, good morning rather. I'm Vinay Kaushal, I've come down from India. And so a couple of years back, I had a production music track that placed on on the NBA channel, and it played like maybe say 50 times or something. I got to see this because of TuneSat, and I was pretty excited. And there was eventually no cue sheet that ever showed up. So I started doing some research, and then I realized that, oh, there's also some companies that, you know, have a blanket license with certain broadcasters and stuff like that. So I guess my question is, as a composer, how does somebody navigate trying to, you know, because there are so many programs that your music may go on. So how does somebody navigate that, and and how does somebody report that in case you think that there should have been a cue sheet in the first place?
There probably should have been a cue sheet anyway, right? There should have been a cue sheet.
Yeah, but the reality is that there isn't always a cue sheet.
There isn't
Yeah.
always a cue sheet.
Yeah.
So if you licensed your music into a production, usually, at least at Disney, you would get back a fully executed copy of the license with your payment and a cue sheet. Okay? So if you're not getting a cue sheet back, you need to ask for it.
So this is through a production music library, so should I be asking them, or should I be asking ASCAP?
Yeah.
Whoever?
Yes, yes. And I assure you, they will find the cue sheets, because I hear from the production libraries a lot. And I send a lot of cue sheets out.
And they're getting paid too. They have a financial, you know, benefit.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, thank you so much.
Oh boy, we have first hands over here. Sorry, mic person, you have to hurry up.
Hi, thank you so much for all this information. It's been really helpful. I'm a composer, but I've been working. I just finished a short film with a director from London, and when we started this, I asked for a cue sheet to start, like knowing where I'm gonna put music, etc. But it was very simple. And now that we are done with the film, I'm like trying to figure out how we're gonna do this, especially because I want to know how it will work when it's like when you work with international clients. Like sometimes they don't have the same formats that the US have. So I'm gonna be doing my first feature film with people from Chile. So I want to avoid having this, back and forth before I started working with them. So what would be your suggestion here? What should I ask for in terms of the cue sheet, especially because it was a short film, so it was like probably 6 minutes long. That doesn't,
Right. So just real quick, Mark, you would probably know this. Are the requirements for international cue sheets different?
Yeah, very different, very, very different. So here, domestically in the US, you don't have any recording information in a cue sheet. So it's completely missing. You don't have the recording artist, you don't have the record label, you don't have an ISRC, just not part of a cue sheet. Outside of the US and Canada, pretty much all cue sheets have that. So recording information is mandatory in most places because it's licensed in the same way as ASCAP and BMI license here. You've got other organizations outside of the US that license that for TV as well and for film. So that's the...
And CISAC just came out with a new cue sheet format that does include recording.
Yeah, so that
like
was
last week.
Yeah, that's right. So that's a Society Publisher Forum. They've created a template. That's a good template to use that has recording information in there. So, but like ultimately it comes down to what market is that cue sheet created for, what is the original territory of release, and the cue sheet will be optimized for that territory. That's typically what happens. So if you have a domestic US cue sheet, that's often an issue outside of the US because people cannot identify recording information in it. And if you have a cue sheet that was created in the UK, it will probably have recording rights information in it, but it should have all the same publishing information in it. So, there should not be an issue from a composer's perspective when you're dealing with a UK cue sheet. The composer side is usually the same around the world.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I would add, if you're working with any kind of independent company or even smaller production companies, I think it's a really good idea to make the cue sheet yourself and send it to them and say, I don't know if you guys have made a cue sheet, like I'm happy to fill this information into whatever template you guys need, but here it is, because if you're asking for the cue sheet, very often you're asking somebody to do work. Yeah. And we're all human and we know what that's like. Hey, can you do this work for me? Like, you're gonna get pushed back, or they're gonna just keep trying to lump it on somebody else. And you want to keep your relationship with the producer or director or somebody very much creative. You don't want to be like a burden on them. So I've used whatever the most detailed template I've ever gotten with the recording information. I'll fill that out and give it to the director or producer I'm working with. Here is a cue sheet. It's in an Excel form. We can copy it over to whatever you need. But just so we have a chain, an email chain with the cue sheet, here you go. And then if they say, oh, we just sold it to this, we need it to be filled out, then they just follow up on that chain and we have all the information.
Would
But
you suggest they maybe ask them to modify it a little bit so it has the kind of like the format that the US have? This is the first time I've worked directly with a director, because I've done other productions where like there was a company involved and they took care of all of that. Like they have, you know, a bigger team to work on, music supervisor or music editor, etc. So would you suggest like I talk to the director directly and say like, hey, we'll modify this? And I think they would be open probably.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think I understood what you said. I think, but the bottom line is just make sure that like you're doing the work and presenting like, here's an easy fix, here you go.
Right.
Get it started. Happy to do whatever you want me to do, but if you don't want to do anything,
Yeah.
it's done. Here it is.
Got to be
you know?
proactive.
Yeah.
Do we have time for more questions? Are we still good for questions?
We have a
Yes.
question from the live stream in the back. So we could do one live stream
okay,
question.
let's do it.
Okay, we have a question
Yeah.
from Marcus. He asks, this is a question for Jacob. When composing for a TV series and maybe not fully knowing if the series will be 1, 5, 10, or more seasons, how do you maintain consistency in your music across multiple episodes/seasons while keeping it fresh and engaging for the audience?
Okay, that's a creative question, not a cue sheet question, but you're welcome to answer it.
Yeah, I think I understood him. Are they asking how do I keep it creative across multiple seasons? I mean, it's really easy because if you don't, usually they will try to fire you. I mean, as
Everyone's
the show,
replaceable.
yeah, as the show develops, your music will develop, and you know, if you don't develop, the editors will subtly start temping in music from other shows. Like, we want to really change things up. Like, we're not, you know.
That's
so
where production music libraries come into play.
yeah. So it's actually, I find it, to keep myself interested, I always want to up the ante, and on multi-series productions, sometimes in between seasons, I might go do some recordings, work with musicians, just to see how I can shake it up. I did work on one series, though, where I remember I was so mad, because it was before Stranger Things, and I got like a Prophet 12, and I was all into the 80s synths, and then I wrote all this music for season 2 of this thing, and I remember the network executives were like, what is going on? Why does it sound like the 80s? Like, we hate this, get all of it back, go back to what you did in season 1. And I was like, no, you don't understand, this is so cool. And the same executive was, have you seen Stranger Things? The music is so good. And I was
So
like,
80s.
I was so bummed. But anyway, yeah, I was told to go back in that instance. Go back to what you did in season 1. But outside of that, you gotta evolve. Yeah.
Nice. More question. One more question. Last question, right in the front. Yes.
I wondered if you could please identify how this happened. So, talking about cue sheets, my co-writer for a TV show that was award-winning, and it went on for 8 seasons, he was only paid for the main title credit of the show, and mine paid me for the main title and the end title.
No, were you with different performing rights organizations?
Yes, we were.
Oh, well, that might be a question. Barbie, I think, is back behind you.
Was the
I don't know who
end
Barbie is.
title different from the main
It was the
title?
exact same 8
And
seconds of the song.
you both
We both co-wrote it,
co-composed.
yes. And it
That was the channel on a sample?
So
Not
what
a
I would do
census?
is check with your PRO to see if they have a cue sheet. Make sure the cue sheet is correct. If the cue sheet
Okay.
is incorrect, they will come to us. If it's a Disney, they'll come to Disney, whatever production area it is.
It was The
and
Shield.
they will get a revised
The
cue
TV show,
sheet.
The Shield.
Pardon me?
It was The Shield on Fox FX.
Oh, so that was my fault.
That's reason.
I used to be at Fox.
Yeah, pre Disney Fox. I just had to say that.
Is that a function then of the production company and
Well, the cue sheet is, because that's, they have to create that. Cue sheets come from production companies, but I think as far as payment discrepancies, that might be a PRO thing. It could be.
Yeah, I would say if you've got two co-writers and one co-writer gets paid for both cues and the other one gets paid for one cue, I would assume that the cue sheet is accurate because the same cue sheet would go to both PROs. So to me, it doesn't sound like a cue sheet issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Either way, you've got to go to the PRO. Are you both affiliated with the same PRO?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Yeah.
It might be, you need to go to the PRO.
Yeah.
And I noticed, it's a part B to that question, though. Recently, I placed 3 songs in the Cleaning Lady TV show. And when we did the main title, I performed on all the songs for both shows. They asked who were the vocalists, and then on the other shows, they don't ask. So I'm just curious why that is, and because then there's a different payout. And that was my question.
Well, not from performing rights. There wouldn't be a payout, but.
Yeah, there's no cue sheet element to a vocalist, especially not in the US. Yeah, like for foreign distribution, you could have performing artists on the cue sheet. So you could have the band or the artist, but that's typically the featured artist. It's not a vocalist or the bass player. Cue sheets do not go to that level, and there's no payment on that level either, at least not driven through the performance rights organizations.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I think that's time. Thank you guys so much. Check your cue sheets.